Alright, so what is Marshal JMD1? Basically, the Marshal JMD1 is a combination of 16 digital preamp sounds, and these things have been created from some of Marshall's best loved amps from the past. You've then got a classic Marshall EL34 valve power stage, and a great internal multi-effects unit as well, consisting of various different effects. What we're going to do, we don't have too much time, but we're going to try and whiz through and squeeze as much as we can into this demo right here and look at the preamps and the effects in more detail as we go on. You can also program this amp to its full capability. With the included foot switch, you can store up to 28 different sounds, and the amp will store absolutely every single thing apart from the master volume and the presence control. So what we're going to do first is check out across the front panel and the rear panel of the Marshal JMD1. Alright, so on the front panel of the Marshal JMD1, firstly on the far left after your guitar input, you've got your preamp section. This is where you choose which of the 16 digital Marshal preamps you want to create your sound. They're all been given different names to describe the sound, but you can check out the handbook or the Marshal website for more information as to what those sounds are based on. Next up, you've got your gain control, followed by a pretty standard EQ section, which is bass, middle and treble, and then you've got volume, so you can set the channel volume, if you will, for each of those sounds. If you want one higher than the other, you can do that from there. Next up, you've got your effects section. Firstly, your modulation, which starts with your modulation adjust here, which contains where you choose which effect that you've got going on and also the speed of it. Next to that, you've got your modulation depth control just here, how deep you want the effect to sound. Next up, your delay adjust, where you choose which delay type you want of the 4 delay types. And next to that, you've got your delay level. Don't forget, there's also the tap tempo control just up here for delay. Then you've got your digital reverb control, your presence and your master volume. Going along the top with the buttons, first you've got your manual control. You switch this on over to manual whenever you want to use the amp as a regular amp. Then you've got your channel buttons just here, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Then you've got your modulation switch to turn the modulation effects on or off. Your delay, as I said, also works as a tap tempo control. If you want a fast delay or a slow delay, you hold it to turn it off again. Then you've got an external effects. If you're running effects through the effects loop, you bring them in here. You've got a compare button, so when you're trying out new sounds, you can compare it to the sound that you'd previously saved. And finally, you've got your foot switch stroke MIDI program button for doing all sorts of shenanigans with MIDI controlling and with the included foot controller. And on the rear panel of the Marshal JMD1, firstly, you've got your MIDI connections, where you've got your MIDI through and MIDI in. Next up, you've got your foot controller input just here. Then you've got your emulated line out. In the center of the cabinet, you've got your headphone out and your line in for CD player or MP3. Then you've got your preamp out, and then your effects loop section here, which consists of a mix control, effects level, and good old return and send. And finally, at the end, you've got your loudspeaker output connections. Also, the speakers inside the Marshal JMD series are Celestion speakers, and in the cabinets they are the Celestion G1270MD. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the Marshal JMD1 a little bit more in depth. Firstly, looking at the preamp sounds. As I said earlier, they're all digital and they're based on some of Marshall's best loved amps. But so you can hear these things in context, we're going to look at a few of them individually. Firstly, to let you know, I've switched the amp over to manual compared to how you heard it earlier where I'd preset all my sound. So now everything as it lays out on the front panel is working as a regular amp should be. All the controls are doing what you'd expect them to do. Now the preamp section is divided into 4 groups of 4. So you've got 4 clean sounds, 4 crunch sounds, 4 overdrive sounds and 4 lead sounds. And what I'm going to do is be starting on number 1 just here, which we've called Modern. Now this sound is actually from our more recent JVM series. It's the clean sound, and on the green mode, sounds something like this. What I'm going to do now is compare that to sound number 2, which is actually from, is called on here Full, and it's the clean sound from our JCM 2000 DSL series. So already you can hear just out of the 2 clean sounds, they sound very different, obviously, when brought in with the power amp, and you start to feel the sound more than just hear it. What we're going to do now is move on to some of the crunch sounds, and first up I'm going to be moving around to number 4. Now this sound is actually a 1974, Marshal 1974, which is an 18-watt combo, which was actually twinned with the EQ of a 1959, a classic Marshall sound, and you can hear it straight away. It sounds and it responds just as you'd expect a Marshall amp to do. So obviously we make equipment for live playing, and we wouldn't want to, be doing any sounds that sound artificial or anything like that. This amp is meant for playing live and to have, maximum versatility. What I'm going to do now is move over to sound number 5, which is called Vintage, and this is actually a copy of the preamp of the JCM 800. Okay, moving on to some of the overdrive sounds. We're going to move up to number 10 now, which is called Modern on here, and this is actually from the JVM series, again on the Crunch channel, the JVM on the red mode. Sounds something like this. And the next overdrive sound we're going to look at is called Detuned, which is from the Marshall Mode 4. This is found here on number 12. Okay, up next we're going to move on to some of the lead sounds, so you can hear those in context. And first off, we're going to move up to number 13, which is actually we're going to go number 14, because that's a very cool one. It's actually the original Marshall Governor pedal, which has been made into a preamp, and you can hear it's actually personally one of my favorite sounds, as it's a really unique kind of sound to it. And the last sound we're going to look on the preamps is number 16, which again is from the JVM, I believe, which is the overdrive 1 sound on the orange mode. And this is, probably the highest gain setting that's in the amp here. Alright, so that's a look at just some of the preamp sounds that are in the Marshall JMD one. What we're going to do now, though, is move on to the effects section. Digital effects, and these things are very versatile, very cool. First up, we're going to be looking at the modulation pot just here. The modulation effects consist of 2 different pots. Firstly, the modulation adjust and the modulation depth. At the beginning, though, when you turn the control anti-clockwise, you've got a noise gate for those higher gain sounds. If you want to get rid of all the hiss of the higher gain noise, you can do that. The first official modulation effect you've got there is chorus, and after that you've got phaser, flanger, and then tremolo, which is a very classic Marshall effect anyway. As I said, you have the modulation depth, so you can control the depth of each effect, and I will show you that now. Bringing in the modulation effects just here on the top of the panel there with the modulation button. I've set the depth to half. I'm not going to be using the noise gate at the moment because I want a clean sound, so this is the start of the chorus. Now, if you're familiar with some Marshall effects, then you'll know that the more that you turn around the little parameter line there, the more intense the effect will get. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that where it is, but turn the depth up so you can hear the difference that the depth control makes on that chorus as it is. Bringing the depth back down, but now I'm going to bring the adjust up so the speed of the chorus will speed up. And if you want a really crazy, wacky kind of chorus sound, you can bring the depth up as well. So what I'm trying to really point out here is that the effects can be as subtle or as intense as you want with this amp, and you can store any of these effects to any of your chosen sounds as well. Moving on, we're going to now look at the phaser sound. This is set somewhere in the middle of the bar there. Moving it anti-clockwise will slow it down. Moving it more clockwise, what I'm going to do is hold a chord and move it up so you can hear it. You can hear it speeds it up. You can also change the depth of the phaser. Same thing with the flanger if I leave the depth on full. And change the speed of the flanger. And finally the tremolo, which is one of my favorites. Going to bring the depth down to half. It will make it quite subtle. Bringing the depth up now. Again, you can make it as subtle as you want. You can speed it up as well if you want a really quick tremolo sound. Alright, so once again, that's a very kind of quick look at some of the modulation effects that are in the amp. What I'm going to do now is turn the modulation effects off and look at the delay effects on their own. The first thing you'll notice that when I turn the delay effects on is the button flashing very quickly. You can use this as a tap tempo. If you want to slow the effect, the delay down to whichever speed you want, you can do that. And you've actually got 4 types of delay effect on here. And this is done on the delay adjust button just here. You've got hi-fi, analog, tape, and multi. So what we're going to do is you have a delay level control here, which I'm going to bring up to about 3/4. And we're going to start looking at some of these delay sounds. So first up is the hi-fi sound. All right, moving around now to analog. You can hear, obviously I'd set the analog delay slightly longer than the delay before, but you can hear the delays are starting to deteriorate as they repeat, like an analog delay would. Then you've got your tape just here. Which is very reminiscent of an old tape echo. And finally you've got your multi, which is sends 2 different delay types out behind the signal. All right, so obviously I had, those delay settings set up pretty intensely, but you can tame them if you want to use the delay level control for the amount of delay level with the signal of the guitar. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at how you can program the JMD one to customize it for yourself. Okay, so what we're going to do now is look at how you can program the Marshal JMD one and customize it for yourself with sounds to your liking. You can store everything, the preamp, the EQ section, whichever effects you have set and where you have them set. The only thing that the amp will not store is the master volume and the presence control. So to store a sound, very straightforward. I've set up a sound here. I'm on a clean preamp number 2. I've set my EQs, I've brought the middle down, the treble up. I've got this kind of sound. I brought the reverb in quite high, and now I'm going to add some modulation effects just here. So I'm going to give it some chorus. Depth is on half. That's the sound that I want to store, and it's as simple as going to where it says channel 1. You can do it to any of the 4 channels on the amp. And I'm just going to hold down channel 1 until you see the other lights just here come on. And now that is my new sound in channel number 1. And just to show you how you can make a difference with other sounds, I'm going to move the preamp section round to number 5, or maybe number 4. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to, like a classic Marshall sound. Going to bring the mids up though, and I'm going to drop the treble back to half. And let's put some tremolo in there. I've brought the speed down, brought the depth up. And that's the sound I want. I took the reverb off. I'm going to store that now. You might have seen that channel number 1 has started flashing. That means something has changed since the last time I stored, because I'm making this new sound, and I'm going to store that just to here, number 2. Hold that down. And so now what we've got is when we go to number 1, we've got that nice clean sound that I set up. Moving over to channel 2, we've got that nice classic Marshall with some tremolo. So to set up your JMD1 and customize it for yourself, it's really that simple. Now you can do this in several ways. You can do it as you've just watched me do it there on the 4 channel buttons on the front of the amp. You can also transfer those 4 channel buttons to the foot controller, or you can change the mode of the foot controller and store up to 28 of those sounds, making this an incredibly versatile amp. That's pretty much it from me. For more information on the Marshal JMD1, please head over to marshallamps.com, where there's more information, all the pictures and more online demos that you need. And nice to be here. Thanks for having me.